is National Geographic Channel Presents. Coffee. Bold, aromatic, and energizing.
Triple grande 2% latte?
Millions of people just have to drink a cup, at least one, every day. But coffee is much more than just a pick-me-up.
It's Mountain Grown.
It has inspired romance and incited revolutions.
That's the richest kind.
If there ever is a settlement on Mars, I'm sure that one of the first things will open up is a coffee house.
The amazing coffee discovery.
From instant to gourmet, we'll explore coffee from beans to buzz.
If tomorrow coffee were suddenly withdrawn from the world and there were no such thing as coffee anymore, people would go frantic, for one thing. I mean, they would begin to go like this.
I walked into a Starbucks about a year ago. Little kid behind the counter.
Hi, sir.
Yeah, give me a regular. Regular what? Coffee. What flavor? Coffee flavored.
Decaf grande non-fat latte, 1 equal and with cream.
Got a grande mocha Valencia.
I have an iced grande caramel macchiato.
You can get every other flavor except coffee flavored coffee.
Hazelnut latte.
They got mochaccino, they got chocochino, frappuccino, cappuccino, rappuccino, alpuccino. What the f?
Hazelnut latte.
These days, making a good cup of coffee can be a labor of love.
The perfect latte starts with the perfect espresso shot. Now we begin the espresso extraction. I'm grabbing a chilled container for my steamed milk, because the chilled container helps me make better foam, and some cold whole milk. I love producing the awesome latte that the person comes back and says, "That's the best latte I've ever had." You're listening for when the bubbles are coming out like tight, foamy, frothy bubbles. And I can also hear when the milk is hot enough because it gets to a deeper pitch. It's like hearing the right musical note. You've left maybe half an inch in the top for your espresso shot, which is by now done extracting. And you pour it very slowly into the foam, and you'll see that it stays just above the layer of milk. So you get this beautiful sunset effect. And then you can even add a little chocolate sprinkles if you like. It's perfect.
It's three friends with gourmet taste on a search for the perfect cup of coffee that helped jumpstart the whole specialty coffee revolution in the U.S. In 1971, after trying the coffee in cafes from Berkeley to Vancouver, Jerry Baldwin and his partners opened up their own little coffee bean shop in Seattle's Pike Place Market. And they name it after the coffee-drinking first mate in Moby Dick, Starbuck.
It was instantly successful, and I became the person who was the roaster and the coffee buyer, and it just got in my blood.
Now since the brewing and the pressing of the caffeinated coffee bean, some pretty heavy hitters have been hitting at the coffee house scene.
With over 12,000 locations worldwide, Starbucks has gotten into a lot of people's blood.
And talking that bohemian rag, even at Starbucks, call it revolution. It's clearly evolution. And talking that bohemian rag.
I joined Starbucks in 1982 when we were opening our 4th store, believe it or not. The epiphany for me, though, was when I was actually sent by Starbucks to Italy and became enamored with the Italian coffee bar and how they brought coffee to life, the theatrical presentation, the extension of people's homes. And since Starbucks only sold whole bean or ground coffee for the home, I raced back from Italy with this wonder in my eye about recreating the Italian coffee bar in my own image and bringing it to America.
After returning to the U.S., Howard Schultz's goal is to create and then expand the Starbucks coffeehouse experience. Jerry Baldwin chooses to stick with roasting and acquires Peet's of Berkeley. Italians have been serious about making coffee for hundreds of years. At Italy's famous Illy Cafe, a specialty is cappuccino, a classic blend of espresso and steamed milk named after the brown robes of Capuchin monks. Owner Ernesto Illy knows how far coffee has come from its ancient methods of preparation, and he credits the impatience of Italians for the discovery of espresso.
The Neapolitan people are impatient. And one guy had a friend in Milano and said, listen, can you make it a little faster? I have to wait 6-8 minutes to have my cup of coffee. Put some pressure on top. And the guy put some pressure. And this was the beginning of the espresso. The espresso that is so strong in taste, in aroma, and in the body is weak in caffeine because you do not have time to extract all the caffeine that is in the ground coffee. The art of the espresso is to stop extracting when all the good stuff is in the cup and all the bad remains to be thrown away. And this means approximately 1.5 ounces. So this is why espresso must be prepared in a small cup, because the temptation to put some more water in a big cup will spoil the pleasure of a perfectly prepared espresso. So you have this funny contradiction. It is strong, smells a lot, and it has a low caffeine. This is why the Italian can drink 10 cups of coffee, espresso, in Italy. And when they visit the States and they drink 10 cups of American coffee, they get shaky because too much caffeine.
Coffee beans were probably roasted for the first time in Ethiopia. Someone may have accidentally burned a coffee bean and discovered how good it smelled. From then on, boiling water is poured over roasted ground beans to make a dark black coffee. It is the Arabs that first introduced coffee to Europe in the 1600s. One entry point for the bean is Vienna.
It was during a siege of Vienna by an Arab sultan who had sent a tremendous army to conquer the West. And he made his way to the gates of Vienna, and he surrounded Vienna. He was about to conquer the city.
All of Europe was in the balance. They were trying to figure out who they could send to try to get some sort of reinforcements. There was a Pole named Franz George Kolschitsky who had lived in Arab lands and who spoke the language. So he dressed up as an Arab. He snuck out through the lines,
delivered a message to the French troops that they needed help. The French came, they defeated the Arabs, and the Arabs fled. In their haste, they left behind their bags of unroasted coffee.
Nobody knew what they were. They thought they were camel fodder, so they were burning them. Kolschitsky smelled it. He said, oh, that's coffee. Don't burn that. I'll take it if nobody else wants it.
Kolschitsky soon opens Vienna's first coffee house, the Blue Bottle, and eventually the Viennese changed the way coffee is made.
People in Vienna didn't like the grounds in the bottom, so they started to filter it. And they didn't like the raw taste of just plain coffee, so they started adding milk to it. And it's the way that we have it today.
Cheese.
Chin chin.
Today, coffee drinking is sometimes elevated to a gourmet experience.
You have two of the greatest noses in the entire country right here. These are people that we consider...
nose insured for?
Coffee tasters evaluate acidity, aroma, body, and flavor. Slurping allows the coffee to disperse evenly throughout their mouths.
George is looking for individual traits that he thinks could indicate a great single coffee. That's his passion. Whereas Jim, his blends are a legend. He's like a symphonic conductor.
Many coffee connoisseurs searching for the perfect cup of coffee agree that the finest coffee is Ethiopia's Yirgacheffe.
This is a very subjective thing. So one person's favorite doesn't mean it's the best, even if it's George. But the thing is that we all did, as a consensus, we did agree that number one had the qualities that made it an excellent cup of coffee.
Like that perfect peach that
It's very round.
explodes. Exactly. It's got that roundness, but all the acidity is there too, but it's perfectly cradled by everything else and the flavors in it. And to me, that's worth anything you can pay for it.
Looking for a hip, alternative coffee house? Or will just about any Starbucks make your day?
If you don't want exactly the same Starbucks experience, go somewhere else.
And later, was coffee really that bad in the 1950s and 60s?
Honey, you won't be able to give your coffee away.
Not really.
A lot of people still buy canned supermarket coffee and guzzle it down just for the buzz. But these days, many also want their coffee to taste not just good, but excellent.
I think that I enjoy the more expensive coffees just because I've pretty much gotten used to the taste of it, and now a plain cup of coffee with no flavoring or no espresso just isn't the same to me.
So I have often ordered coffee someplace, and when I saw it, have said, I can't drink this, and give it back because it looks and tastes like dirty water.
In the U.S., about 60% of the population drinks specialty coffee regularly, and 15% drink it every day. Americans spend over $10 billion a year on quality coffee.
It has been an unbelievable turn of events over the last 6 or 7 years to watch the response that people all over the world have had to Starbucks. And that experience is not American. That experience has a universal language and universal appeal, and that has been the big breakthrough for us.
Starbucks works hard to create a standardized universal coffee house culture. At best, this is its appeal. And at worst, it's a threat to alternative coffee house culture.
A lot of people don't like Starbucks because it's exactly the same experience wherever you go. And frankly, I think that's justified criticism in many cases. I mean, if you don't want exactly the same Starbucks experience, go somewhere else. The good news is that usually there is an alternative.
One alternative to Starbucks is the California-based website dlocator.net. Just type in your zip code and find every alternative cafe within a few miles of your door.
Starbucks has bought out some very good chains, and they will continue to do that. They are the big bully on the specialty block. There's no question about that.
For many, the quality of coffee served and the convenience of a coffee house's location determine where they'll buy their next cup. But others are looking for more.
On the weekends, it's definitely a social thing.
It's relaxing. It's a good place to meet someone without feeling like you're rushed.
The one location we have in Silver Spring is very unique. It was a site that my wife and I saw about 5 years ago, and it's way too big to be a coffee shop, but it had so much character. It's an old factory from the 30s. The space is really nice and open. That's really important to us too, is create an environment where people feel at ease and people feel good and people feel positive. It'll make that coffee experience that much better for them as well.
The coffee house ritual goes back over 500 years. The first ones are in what's now known as the Middle East.
Very wealthy people would have entire rooms devoted to coffee drinking, and became the social thing that you did when somebody came over. For poorer people, coffee khanas, coffee houses, sprang up, and people began to frequent them.
And they were considered to be a source of vice, a source of possible sedition and revolution, with good reason, actually. Because the truth is, people do talk about politics in coffee houses.
In 1511, the governor of Mecca, whose name was Khair Beg, heard that people were doing lewd and terrible things in the coffee houses, but worse than that, they were saying bad and funny things about him. They were making up satirical verses about him. So he decided that he would ban the coffee houses.
However, the Sultan of Cairo, who was his boss, who loved coffee, and it was being served in Cairo, when he heard about this, he reversed the order.
In France, the cafe has always been home to caffeine-inspired artists and intellectuals. The French novelist Balzac wrote in a cafe. It's rumored he drank 40 cups a day. About coffee, he said, sparks shoot all the way to the brain. In fact, the arrival of the French cafe in the late 1600s drastically improves the level of debate, as coffee replaces wine and beer as the drink of choice.
In France under Louis XIV and XV in the 17th and 18th centuries, a man drinks on average 2 gallons of wine per day and about half a liter of pure alcohol per day. And he worked 14 to 15 hours a day. Everyone drinks, even children.
I believe Europe was under an alcoholic haze for decades. Then all of a sudden coffee started to come in, and you found a new place where people could drink and communicate and join together without the alcohol.
Newly sober and alert, people sit at marble-top tables and discuss events of the day.
The coffee shop had an important role to play. Where the coffee shop owner put newspapers around, they became places where people would congregate to have important political discussions.
The same coffee that ushers in the age of reason in France also imposes colonialism in the Americas. In Haiti, slaves toil on coffee plantations until they plot the only successful slave revolt in modern history.
It's ironic that the reason the slaves revolted in 1791 was that 2 years before, the French Revolution had begun. And in large part, the French Revolution had been planned in coffee houses, and coffee had been one of the germs for it, getting people to think and plot the revolt.
But coffee houses in France in the 17th and 18th centuries aren't just for intellectuals and activists. They also become fashionable places to see and be seen.
Évidemment, les premières à répandre la mode, ce sont les femmes.
The first to embrace this new fashion were women. They would come for tea, coffee, chocolate, and pastries. Coffee was considered an aphrodisiac for men. It isn't true, but that doesn't matter. Coffee was a woman's beverage, so logically it was defended by women against wine, which was reputed to impede male performance.
In England, however, women aren't allowed in coffee houses. And because of this, British women develop a suspicious attitude about the relationship between coffee and sex. In fact, a group of women in London puts out an anti-coffee house pamphlet called The Maiden Complaint,
which, among other things, said, when they come home, our gallants have nothing moist but their noses, nothing stiff but their joints, and nothing standing but their ears. So it was very funny. The men wrote a response to this, by the way, where they said that that wasn't true, that coffee, in fact, added a spiritual essency to the sperm and made them much better lovers.
In actual fact, the coffee houses were full of prostitutes upstairs, and the reason for the maiden's complaint was that the husbands were sleeping upstairs with Catherine for a sixpenny special, coming downstairs for a cup of coffee, and when they arrived home and the wife said, how about it, they would say, I'm sorry, I just had a cup of coffee.
Now, at the start of the 21st century, besides selling good coffee, coffee houses can be places to hear music, drink alcohol, do business, and buy CDs or books. And many manage to be family-friendly at the same time.
We wanted to have that all-around community. We didn't want to just have people coming in on their way to work and grab a cup of coffee. We wanted people to come after work, during happy hour, on the weekend, to come to listen to a band.
From the gold rush to the 1960s, coffee in the U.S. is just plain bad. On the brink of the American Revolution, we are still a country of tea and beer drinkers. Ironically, our loyalty to coffee begins when the British put a tax on tea.
The colonists didn't much like the idea of this tax, and a local business person and brewer, Samuel Adams, got a whole bunch of Sons of Liberty together. They boarded a British merchantman, dumped all the tea in Boston Harbor. It was a signal that the days of being colonies under Britain were ended, and the signal of which side you were on in the struggle was the difference between walking into a tavern and ordering coffee or walking into the coffee house and ordering tea.
From this time on, drinking coffee becomes a patriotic duty, and by the 19th century, most Americans are roasting their own coffee beans.
Which sounds nice, and in a way it was. At least it was fresh roasted. But mostly what people would do would be to put the beans in their frying pan and then sort of stir them around on top of a wood stove. And they would get burned on the outside, they would be raw on the inside, and it would be pretty terrible coffee. And then they would grind them with a little hand grinder, and they would brew it by boiling it for like a half an hour or just leaving it on the stove all day long. Particularly cowboys prided themselves on their really strong coffee, you know, strong enough to float a horseshoe, is their phrase.
Gold! Gold from the American River! Gold!
During the gold rush, people dash to the west. Many are looking to make their fortune. One is a young man named Jim Folger, who comes from a famous whaling family.
The Folgers were so famous that Herman Melville mentioned them when he wrote Moby Dick. They lived in Nantucket, but by the 1840s, the sperm whales were pretty much hunted out. So the young Folger boys, teenagers, were allowed by their parents to take ship to the boomtown of San Francisco to try to find gold.
James Folger realized that if they could roast the coffee and grind the coffee and take it up to the gold fields already roasted and ground, it would be better for the miners. And they immediately fell in love with this product.
And Folger decided that he could make his fortune not from gold, but from coffee.
In the late 1800s, Folger isn't the only businessman seeking his fortune in coffee.
Joel Cheek was a great coffee merchant. His firm, Cheek Neal Coffee Company in Nashville, was just a wonderful, wonderful roaster. And he served the great Nashville hotel, the Maxwell House. The President of the United States visited that hotel and tried the coffee and looked at it, drank it down, turned the cup upside down and said, "Bully, it's good to the last drop." It made his fortune.
But the big fortune in coffee is usually made only on the retail end. The profits for coffee growers, the majority being Brazilian, are bound to a wildly fluctuating market.
In 1880, that was the beginning of what's now called the boom-bust cycle. There would be too much coffee, the price would go down, people would then beware and stop growing so much, the price would go up, and then it would start all over again. Well, by 1900, the Brazilians were growing way, way too much coffee, and the price was so low that there was going to be a revolt.
Brazil adopts a radical strategy, withholding part of the coffee harvest in hopes of boosting the world price. But the plan backfires. Farmers continue to grow coffee, and before long, Brazil is buried in unsold beans.
Because there was too much coffee, and because the market was artificially elevated in 1929, the coffee market crashed just a few weeks before the stock market crashed. In fact, that was one of the causes of the stock market crash. And then we entered this prolonged Great Depression. In
the U.S., consumers can still get a cup for a nickel, But during the Depression, small roasters are no match for big business. Many of the old labels are taken over. Fresh roasts all but disappear, while stale, inferior blends in a can dominate the marketplace.
Everywhere above the Mason-Dixon line, canned coffee became, or cans became, the way that coffee was sold in the grocery stores. Along the way, the Great Atlantic and Pacific Company began to invent what we now call the supermarket. And the supermarket gave you a delivery system. And it was extremely expensive to do this, so only the largest brands could succeed. And slowly but surely, the remnant of the little mom-and-pop store that roasted coffee and sold coffee out of sacks and barrels disappeared.
Cotton bean, soybean, how have you been? String bean, I'm not keen for a bean, unless it is the cherry coffee bean.
During World War II, because it was very difficult to brew coffee while you were in a trench, instant coffee became quite popular.
The amazing coffee discovery. You know,
Any resemblance to real coffee beans is purely coincidental. But instant, refined crystals made from cheap brewed coffee go well with the post-war rage for everything modern.
millions of tiny hollow flavor.
It was such bad quality that it didn't matter whether you used good beans or not. They would be ruined in the process, so why pay money for good beans?
Maxwell House Coffee Sale. Save money and enjoy the coffee.
The big roasters got into these price wars with each other. And they would cheapen the blend to offer the cheapest possible canned coffee in the store. They would put more and more of the Robusta beans, the cheaper beans, into the blend. And as a result, what was happening was people were drinking less and less coffee. They were literally drinking less cups, but in the cups they were making more and more dilute coffee because it tasted so bad.
What Americans are buying isn't good coffee, but a hot brown liquid to recharge the batteries. Rather than improve the quality, big roasters try to sell more through advertising.
It's ironic that one of the most famous and one of the most really lilting and wonderful television ads for coffee is the Maxwell House percolator theme, and it's celebrating a pretty bad way to make coffee because the percolators, especially in the 50s when this ad came out, would, you know, recirculate the coffee and get it more and more bitter. But, you know, everybody knows this theme. I think it goes bum 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 bum. And, you know, it's a very happy little thing.
Pour a cup of this good-smelling coffee. It will taste as good as it's...
Folgers is the proud owner of the best and longest-lasting advertising campaign in the United States.
Honey, your coffee's miserable.
Honey, you won't be able to give your coffee away.
Ned, really? I just can't make good coffee.
Mrs. Olson would help solve that problem by helping explain how mountain-grown Folgers would be a much better product and help satisfy everybody drinking it.
Ever try Folgers?
Folgers coffee? Yeah. Is there some trick to it?
Folgers is mountain grown.
Mountain grown?
That's the richest kind.
Hey, what happened to your coffee, sweetheart?
Sweetheart, this coffee's great.
Now that's what I call coffee.
Coffee might be getting better in TV land, but consumers are drinking less. Products like Sanka, a decaffeinated coffee, are marketed to persuade people to drink more. But many still drink regular coffee rather than decaf in their local 24-hour diner over their bottomless 5-cent cup.
I'm feeling mighty.
But by the mid-50s, the price of a cup of coffee had doubled to 10 cents, and even those days are numbered. When Brazil is hit by bad weather, a scarcity of coffee pushes the market price up for the first time in decades.
Black coffee. No.
Everybody's always looking at the weather in Brazil to see, is there going to be a drought or is there going to be a freeze? Those are the two things everybody elsewhere in the world prays for, and some people in Brazil pray for, because it boosts the price of coffee. So in 1950 and in 1954, that happened. The price spiked very quickly.
It's the coffee that goes with happy times.
From 1936 on, a Pan American Bureau encourages coffee consumption.
A Pan-American Bureau to promote coffee was created with the contribution of the United States and Canada and the coffee-producing countries of the area. The coffee break was originated there.
The Pan American Coffee Bureau launches a media campaign and introduces the term coffee break into the North American vocabulary. The coffee break is a deliberate attempt to increase consumption, but the strategy doesn't reduce the oversupply of coffee. As Brazil's production continues to increase, the multinational corporations are getting the coffee cheap. Today, many people who produce coffee are only marginally better off than their enslaved ancestors. Even at the best of times, it would cost most coffee farmers a full day's wages to buy the frothy cappuccino consumers enjoy daily in their local coffee house. But ironically, it is this new generation of specialty coffee lovers who could be Latin American coffee growers' best hope. Americans start to learn about coffee growers in the 1960s.
One day in Colombia, South America, Juan Valdez took his coffee to market.
But today, how much do we really know?
Yeah, I really don't know that much.
I know it comes from Africa or South America usually.
This pleased Juan.
Coffee cultivation has come a long way since wild coffee berries were discovered in Ethiopia over 1,000 years ago.
No one really knows who discovered coffee or when exactly it was, but we do know that it was in Ethiopia, that coffee still grows wild in the mountains of Ethiopia. And there's a wonderful legend of Kaldi, the goat herd, that makes as much sense as any other creation myth.
A goat herd named Kaldi loved to make up songs all day as he watched his goats comb the mountainside for food. At the end of the day, he would call them on his pipe to follow him home. One day, the goats did not come. Puzzled and tired, he went to look for them. When Kaldi came upon the goats, they were bleating and darting about excitedly. As he watched, the goats chewed the leaves and berries from a tree he had never noticed before. So Kaldi decided to try a few.
He suddenly felt all kinds of energy and excitement, and he started dancing around and singing, and he felt like writing poetry to his girlfriend and things like that. So that's how coffee was supposedly discovered.
Coffee continues to grow wild until some fertile beans make their way to Yemen. It's there that coffee is first harvested in large amounts. From then on, coffee beans travel the world. And in 1727, coffee's illicit entry into Brazil begins with a border dispute.
French and Dutch Guiana were arguing over their border, and they couldn't get along about it, so they asked an official from Brazil, sort of an outsider, to come up and adjudicate, and his name was Francisco Paleta. He fell in love with the wife of the governor of French Guiana, and they began to have a passionate affair in between negotiations. And when he left, she gave him a bouquet of flowers, and as a token of her esteem, she put some fertile coffee berries in the middle of the bouquet. So he took those back to Brazil, and that's how coffee got to Brazil. And again, this was a major thing because no one was allowed to export the fertile beans. And then Brazil, of course, became the powerhouse of world coffee, which it remains to this day.
In fact, Brazil exports more coffee beans than any other country, supplying about 1/4 of the world's coffee. Coffee creates modern Brazil, but at an enormous environmental cost.
Brazil had been a beautiful, self-sustaining place, lovely rainforests, very fecund land, no problem growing everything you needed. But then they began to cut down all the rainforests. They would burn them.
Brazil has made huge investments in farming technology. Massive new machines can help producers continue to make a profit even when prices drop fairly low. Until very recently, most Americans knew very little about the particulars of coffee production. Actually, in the 1960s, consumers know so little about coffee growers that a fictional coffee farmer is created, Juan Valdez.
One day in Colombia, South America, Juan Valdez took his coffee to market.
Colombia was one of the leaders, and we opened an office in New York, and they discovered that the coffee consumer didn't know anything about coffee. Where does it come from? How is it grown? Who does it? That's why we created in Colombia the image of Juan Valdez, the name of the typical coffee grower that used to come with his mule and the 2 bags of coffee.
One day in Colombia, South America, Juan Valdez took his coffee to market. He had grown the beans in rich mountain soil.
6 months after this campaign started, coffee consumption went up. There was a contact, an awareness with the coffee grower.
This pleased Juan.
Some believe it is the small farmer growing quality coffee that will keep the coffee market sustainable in the long run.
For most people, the ideal cup of coffee or the perfect cup of coffee is produced of washed Arabica coffee.
At the moment, we are in harvest season. Each picker receives a coupon to be allowed to harvest the coffee. We only pick quality beans. The red bean. Nothing green, just red. Red. We're paid about $1.50 per basket. There are people who work fast, picking 6 to 8 baskets a day. Some can earn up to $18 in a single day. It depends on how fast they work.
But the major problem throughout the coffee-producing world is that consumers pay far too little to ensure the farmer's survival.
One day in Colombia, South America, Juan Valdez took his son Ramon to show him how he grows coffee.
Today, in the highlands of Colombia, small farmers like Juan Valdez face being forced off their land or having to support their families by growing drugs, the one cash crop that never goes bust. Coffee growers face many obstacles to getting a fair price for their beans, and it remains to be seen what relief they'll find from a growing specialty coffee industry. When it comes to selling fair trade, environmentally friendly coffee, how does Starbucks measure up?
They actually make more money per pound than just about any coffee company in the world.
Hi, have you heard about the Berkeley Coffee Initiative?
The Berkeley what?
Coffee Initiative?
Any business in the city of Berkeley that sells coffee has to buy coffee from fair trade growers?
It means that all brewed coffee sold within the city has to be organic or fair trade or shade grown.
Berkeley, California is known for being the home of social protest. And now it's at the forefront of coffee's fair trade, environmentally friendly movement. The sale of fair trade coffee is meant to secure the future of the over 500,000 small farmers in the movement. It has yet to meet this admirable goal. Even so, groups like Global Exchange see it as a positive step.
Imagine if your only source of income was once a year and you had no idea month to month what that was going to be. So what normally happens is that sometime in the fall, a local person referred to as a coyote, will come to these farmers and say, hey, I see that your kids don't have any shoes or that your daughter's sick. I tell you what, I will pay you money up front for your harvest now to take care of your immediate needs if you promise me your harvest when it comes in the future. And they get locked into the cycle of poverty and crushing debt because of this. Many of these farmers got together and formed cooperatives, and by working together gained more power vis-a-vis the market. Then throughout the years, they contacted different organizations in Europe, in the United States, in Japan, in different countries, and set up fair trade systems. And what fair trade is then is an international system for assuring that farmers get paid a fair price for their work. About 2/3 of the entire coffee industry is dominated by just a few players. Folgers, for example, is owned by Procter & Gamble, and they do over 600 million pounds of coffee a year.
You know, the Folgers looks richer.
Maxwell House is the second biggest label, and they're owned by Philip Morris, the global cigarette company. And then we also have Sara Lee.
Be back in a second with coffee.
There's Nestle, obviously, which is a huge company around the world in terms of their coffee holdings. After that is Starbucks, and with their expanse worldwide, they are really the global leader in the specialty coffee industry. And they actually make more money per pound than just about any coffee company in the world.
The major labels buy nearly half the world's beans every year, while Starbucks buys about 2%. But as the leading specialty company, Starbucks occupies a unique place in the market as it tries to live up to its claim that coffee is more than just a commodity. In 1999, when protesters in Seattle trash a Starbucks cafe at the World Trade Organization summit, the company has to defend its image as an enlightened multinational corporation.
Starbucks likes to compare itself to the big three companies when it comes down to sustainability because obviously, as a company, they are far and away better than Folgers and Maxwell House. I think that that's really not where the competition is for them, though. They are competing with all of the other specialty coffee importers. So their leadership really needs to come in terms of the specialty industry. And what we've seen is that they're a follower and not a leader.
When the World Trade Organization met in the fall of 1999 in Seattle, the home of Starbucks, Starbucks was a perfect target. At that time, they were not selling any fair trade coffee. They were the world's largest supporter of care, and they were doing all kinds of good, but they were perceived as being the sort of big guy, the McDonald's of coffee. So I can understand why activists have done what they've done, and they have moved Starbucks along faster than they would have gone. Now, Starbucks is selling about 1.6% of fair trade coffee. They've been criticized for not selling enough of it, but that's still a huge amount. They're also selling organic coffee, shade-grown coffee that is bird-friendly, and about 15% of their coffee support the growers who will abide by their certification standards, which are quite high.
Like many small farmers around the globe, Alfredo Ronce provides a healthy environment for both the workers and migratory birds on his farm. But until specialty buyers came along, Alfredo wasn't aware that his organic, bird-friendly coffee could fetch a premium price. With his farm now certified, Alfredo makes 3 times more than he used to from the same beans.
El café no estuviera como está, como ustedes lo ven.
This coffee thrives in the shade. When the leaves fall to the ground, they provide nutrients for the coffee plants. This means the coffee tree produces a healthier, more complete fruit. It's a natural fertilizer. Those of us who practice organic farming know that the best way to work the land is not to throw around chemicals. Our own health has improved dramatically now that we've stopped using chemicals. And the mill pays us a much higher price for organic, bird-friendly growing.
There are millions of bags more coffee than we consumers are willing to drink. And what the world wants is more quality coffee. The farmers can grow less coffee, get a higher price for it, consumers are happy, wildlife is happy, workers are happy, so it's one of those rare win-win situations.
For a person who wants to buy coffee that will do good for the world, there are a number of options. Certainly fair trade is an obvious one, and it's a good one. Rainforest Alliance also has a certification which does good for the environment and for the people who are growing the coffee. If you buy specialty coffee in general, you're probably supporting decent practices in the coffee places where it came from. But it's a very small part of the world market.
As this ancient bean continues to delight us, the hope is that the quality of the bean, the environment in which it grows, and the quality of life of the farmer who grows it may all come together in the perfect cup.
Travel back in time to discover the